Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the poem Goodbye My Fancy, which of course is poem number 3 of the 31 of the cluster called Goodbye My Fancy. But it's really the first of 2 poems in this cluster. The very last poem of Leaves of Grass will in fact be called Goodbye My Fancy. Now the only difference that will be pointed out is that the very last poem has an exclamation point. This one does not, looking very much like the title of the cluster itself. Now, the assumptions are that you have been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, from the very beginning, inscription poems up to and including a set of introductory comments to the cluster called Goodbye My Fancy, and then we just finished with Lingering Last Drops. Now, this poem has a note that attends it that I think is quite crucial in our understanding. Whitman says it this way: behind a goodbye, there lurks much of the salutation of another beginning. To me, development, continuity, immortality, transformation are the chiefest life meanings of nature and humanity, and are the sine qua non of all facts, and each fact. Why do folks dwell so fondly on the last words, advice, appearance of the departing? Those last words are not samples of the best, which involve vitality at its full and balance and perfect control and scope. But they are valuable beyond measure to confirm and endorse the very train, facts, theories, and faith of the whole preceding life. There may be no more important note in all of Leaves of Grass than this observation. He's willing to admit, no, I'm not going to be able to rival what I did in Song of Myself, or Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, or Blue Ontario Shore, or whatever your favorite poem of his is. Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom, maybe the greatest poem in American literature. He says, I get it. I'm not going to be able to rival that. However, these poems of this last section, he'll argue, are vital because they demonstrate he was wanting to play the game in the fields of language, to enjoy that experience right up to the very end of his life, which obviously puts him in the same kind of community as John Keats, writing Bright Star, supposedly, right before he went bye-bye there next to the Spanish Steps in Rome. His students love to visit that hollow, that sacred ground, and obviously the tomb in Rome itself. Now, our Nortons will give us some background information to this actual poem. Nortons will say, Whitman's word to say on this theme is really uttered in the poem of the same title, which closes the group, again with the exclamation point. Fancy is here used in the sense of creative imagination. So here we are back to that idea of the muse. Now oblescent, but often so employed in the times of Coleridge and Poe, and the poem itself was first published in Goodbye My Fancy, 1891. Now we're not unfamiliar with the way in which these little 4-line type poems, 4, 5, 6-line poems, can have such power, and so we'll play the game here. Goodbye, my fancy, I had a word to say, but 'tis not quite the time. The best of any man's word or say is when its proper place arrives, and for its meaning, I keep mine till the last. Now, I love this poem for a number of reasons. I love that he is almost creating the idea later that we will know of in filmmaking of the trailer, which is already looking towards the end. I think he learned some of this from his study of Shakespeare, who is able to play that game over and over again, as we point out so many times in our lectures on Shakespeare, where he seems to be celebrating another one of his plays, making us go, oh yeah, I remember these echoes. I love the fact that he uses the dash, and obviously his contemporary Emily Dickinson would be smiling at the command of the dash here and the way that he's able to set it off. I love the fact that he takes us as well back to Song of Myself 5. Shall we just play that game for a few moments again, just because we love, now as we're coming to the end. I'm going to fight, guys, a lot of this, where I just want to go back and begin to remind us of where we've been. Do you remember in passage 5 he says, I believe in you, my soul, the other I am must not abase itself to you, and you must not be abased to the other. Loaf with me on the grass, loose the stop from your throat, not words, not music or rhyme I want, not custom or lecture, not even the best, only the lull I like, the hum of your valved voice. I mind how once we lay such a transparent summer morning, how you settled your head athwart my hips and gently turned over upon me, and parted the shirt from my bosom bone, and plunged your tongue to my bare stripped heart, and reached till you felt my beard, and reached till you held my feet. Now, again, this kind of language, absolutely challenging the readers of his day, still challenging some of the readers of Leaves of Grass today. All of that, I think, is standing in large measure behind so much of a poem like this. He says it, goodbye my fancy, and then the dash, and then the parenthetics that will take us to the rest of the poem. In other words, the actual poem is just the title, Goodbye My Fancy. Everything else is in parenthetics, an aside, we might say. He says, I had a word to say, which immediately takes us to the logos, which immediately takes us to that idea that we just read. The communication between Whitman and his alter, that is to say his soul, whatever, however you want to think of it. I had a word to say, but it's not quite the time. Now, if you go and look at Nietzsche's, the famous Madman passage, the God is Dead passage, we've given full lecture on it at learnstrong.net, you'll remember that passage ends with something very similar to this. My time has not yet arrived. The idea of time is central to so much of our reading of Leaves of Grass. And I think, as I said to you, T.S. Eliot, I think, learned a lot about the use of the word time when he created his 4 quartets, especially Burnt Norton, those opening lines. Time present and time past are both perhaps present and time future contained in time past. So notice here it is, I had a word to say, but 'tis not quite the time. Then the dash. The best of any man's, later it'll be proper place, here it's best. The best of any man's word or say. I love how he uses the word say as a noun here. Any man's word or say is when its proper place arrives. Everything for Whitman is about timing, which broke his heart, because he always felt like, I should be better known. I should be discovered. And all artists of some ilk have always felt this. We, think of Keats again, and, here lies one whose name is written in water. The idea of timing. The idea, if only it could just be in its perfect proper place. And so he says, it's when the proper place, notice it's not time, it's place, arrives. And for its meaning, and all of a sudden it hits us. This far into Leaves of Grass, here we're coming to the end, we go, yeah, that's true. Whitman has always been about meaning. He's trying to discover the meaning. What is the meaning of it all? I mean, just go back and read, for example, all Leaves of Grass again, which obviously I'm hopeful that you'll do after you've read it once, and just point out the many a times that he's tried to figure out the meaning of it all. What is going on? I mean, what is Learned Astronomer if it's not that game of looking up in silence in the mystic moist night air, right? He says, and for its meaning, I keep mine till the last. In other words, I'm going to share the secret of all secrets, he says, only in the very last poem. Which, oh yeah, by the way, will be called Goodbye My Fancy, but there will be an exclamation point there as opposed to the one that is here. I find this a remarkable way to kind of set us up for the remaining study of poems. At 2A, well, I think it's hard, we could say, for the artist to find the right moment to leave the creation, to leave the creative muse and all of that. Because if you're really invested, you want to be able to enjoy it for as long as you can. And I think Whitman was having a lot of fun writing these poems, even the hard poems. The drum tap poems, for example, hard poems clearly for him to write. Lilacs, hard poem to write, and yet I think he identified the power of the language. At 2B, well, I love the power of the note. That is to say, there's a note that attends this poem that makes it that much even more provocative poem for us. At 3A, well, we read it, of course, Song of Myself 5. I love that idea of the conversation and the quest for meaning by conversing with oneself, which is, of course, exactly what all of us do. I mean, we're driving out in the Badlands, it's the middle of the night, we won't discuss why we're there, we're all alone, our truck breaks down, and what's the first thing we start doing? Well, we start talking. Oh, this is just great. What am I going to do? My mom's going to kill me. Wait. What if I stepped out from behind a sagebrush and asked you, who are you talking to? Other than freaking you out, you would say, what are you talking about? I'm talking to myself. Well, who's doing the talking? Who's doing the listening? I mean, it's kind of one of those weird things that humans get to do, where we get to kind of play that game of inter-conversation. And I think Whitman, in some ways, has been playing the game. I mean, think about the Power Brooklyn Ferry, and clearly, I mean, that's the game that he's playing all the way through. And finally, at 3B, a way to own a poem like this. What was a time that you did have to say goodbye and it really was difficult for you, a time you had to say goodbye to your fancy, to that you care most about. And how about the artists in the house? What about a time that you felt like you had to say goodbye to your muse? Maybe it went away, maybe it came back later, maybe it never did again. And I hope reading Leaves of Grass helps you in that regards. Thank you.